Hey guys, it's Swigs. The Zealot is the penultimate melee class in Darktide. Sure, everybody does melee, and it's not listed as your primary weapon for nothing, but there's something special about the Zealot's propensity to hurl themselves into the fray, and the ability to not just survive, but thrive in that setting that makes them earn that distinction for me, alongside a special place in my heart. And because of this, many newer fanatics seek guidance on what's the best stick to drive through a heretic's frontal lobe, especially once they enter higher difficulties where bringing clunky weapons can spell doom for the entire lobby. And that's what we'll be going over in this video today. And we'll be going over my top 5 melee picks for our most holy class, the Zealot. Also, you're hereby obligated to hear this very important disclaimer for this video. I am not Johnny Darktide, leader of the clan of 40,000 Warhammers, and in that sense, I am just a humble preacher here to proselytize what my personal top 5 melee weapons are, and biases may or may not be present. And I'm also ranking them not just on their top performance, but also how much of a learning curve it takes to get to that point. After all, the easier a weapon is, the more gray matter in your skull available for dissecting all the mayhem happening on screen. So, if I get the order quote-unquote wrong or miss your favorite weapon, I'd love to hear your thoughts as I love all of our holy tools. But otherwise, keep the criticism constructive. Even if I am a hilariously babbling fool, just keep those guns pointed towards the heretics on tertium. But let's get started. At number 5, we have the Cadia assault chainswords with both of its marks, the Mark IV and the Mark 13G. While both variants have their differences, their performance is close enough to me that I'll let them share the slot, and that performance is excellent, by the way. But the number one thing about the assault chainswords are that they are fast. Insanely fast, and that's not even with any attack speed buffs either. In combining a cocktail of attack speed boosts from our talent tree like Faithful Frenzy, Inexorable Judgment, Fury of the Faithful Charge, or Martyrdom, the speed that you can rip this thing through enemies is impossible to replicate without a disconnected shoulder and a lot of pain meds. This insane speed, combined with its general high mobility, puts it in a great place when fighting hordes and dueling specialists and elites. Excelling at avoiding damage without sacrificing any potential aggression as you dodge circles around your targets. And moveset wise, I like both marks for what they bring to the table. The classic Mark IV offers a high attack speed with a better emphasis on horde clear. The Mark 13G being a bit slower, harder hitting, and having access to overhead strikes that are easy peasy to aim right for heretic skulls. But regardless of the variant you pick, the light combos alone are still vicious enough in hordes and will be mulching chaff as is their birthright. Plus, as an added bonus of being a chainsword, you get access to the weapon's rev ability, which helps fill in some additional penetration when working against enemies that it actually remember to strap on some armor. And the rev will generally stagger lock a lot of your enemies, so if they're isolated from any of their allies, you can hold them hostage as you're burying the chainsword hilt deep in their skull, turning their gray matter into a Rorschach painting on the wall. Even though this isn't always fatal, just like a real lobotomy, you can always try again until you get the results you wanted. But for all that it's cracked up to be in hordes, it ain't cracking carapace without a lot of help from its shred ability. And even then, it gets the job done, but yeesh, does sometimes that shred not feel like it's doing what it should. And it will take an awfully long time to bring a crusher down from full health to 0 if this is all you're using. Plus, that crusher isn't going to be locked down like other weaker enemies, so any revving needs to be conscious of when to bug out to dodge their own attacks coming in, which is its own point of frustration about chain weapons revs in general. Even though you can cancel them out with a dodge now, it's still a loss of damage to have to do so, and the added problems that even the enemy you're sawing can sometimes rebuke you is not helping at all. And while the chainsword is very adept at mixed horde clear, it's still not quite the fastest chaff clear on the market, which is the main reason it's hard to put this one higher, even despite its more narrowed issues. But all in all, it's still incredibly powerful and earns its top 5 for me all the same. It's fast, it's versatile, it's easy to pick up and use, and while it's going to be weaker to carapace than other weapons, using hard-hitting ranged options like bolters or revolvers can shore this problem up and then some, leaving you with a well-rounded kit to base a build off of. And for number 4, we have the Crucis Mark II Thunderhammer. The ultimate daemon killer, the Thunderhammer is just unparalleled in terms of raw power, thanks to its handy-dandy delete button special. And this elite killer reputation is only elevated further when equipped with its best available blessing, Thrust, providing a whopping upper end of 60% extra power. And for what it can do to a daemon host, you know it's going to be ready to crush crushers like soda cans, either killing them outright or sending them so hard to the floor that you'll be teeing up another swing before they even stand back up. And it's honestly not too shabby at controlling hordes either, with brain-dead heavies that sweep to and fro, and a light attack combo of quick strikes that are good at finishing off any stickier remnants at a faster pace. but for all of its potential, it does come at the cost of a slight learning curve, requiring us rejects to actually aim our strikes to make sure that they land on a walking tank and not hitting the rotting, nearly dead already poxwalker standing next to them. And to really get the most out of our weapon, we'll also need to be aiming to rattle the brain cage too, which can be a bit difficult on account of its horizontal sweeping heavies and the existence of taller enemies like ogres and monstrosities, sometimes requiring us to do a little small hop to get the angle just right. And after that powered strike, it suffers a pretty brutal cooldown, allowing us to still block, but blocking us out of the ability to properly dodge attacks, which can be outright fatal if a mauler or crusher prepares an overhead to punish us as we sit there helplessly holding up our weapon. This downside means that you'll need to be more particular about when you press your delete button, which can be quite defeating, considering that's the #1 reason to run the Thunderhammer in the first place. And though horde control is perfectly acceptable, it can still be a bit slower at clearing larger groups, and not clearing all that extra chaff surrounding the elites you're trying to target can choke you out of assuming your primary role as an elite killer. But all in all, it's worth it, and even if you are struggling with it, you owe it to yourself to learn just for the unadulterated joy of watching 3 other players wondering where a boss's health bar went. And while all those downsides may have sounded like a reason to give up the weapon, you can overcome a lot of this by bringing a ranged option that can help you manage those hordes better, which can help you isolate elite targets for hammer strikes, while also forcing you to lean less on the hammer's more limited horde clear. Example weapons that can fit this role being flamers, shotties, and most auto guns that you can spray into a crowd with. And at our number 3 spot, the Tucholsky Mark 6 Heavy Sword. Though if you want to sub in the Mark 9, I won't stop you, it is also a beauty. But this thing is a beast, and its performance really rivals Combat Axis for a perfect mix between horde clear and elite removal. It's lethal when swiping through hordes, and when powered up by damage boosting blessings like Headtaker and Rampage, it is laughably easy to slap hordes away doing nothing more than clicking your left mouse button a bajillion times. And since the weapon is a cleaving chunk of sword, Deathblow isn't as required for heavy swords as much as brutal momentum is required by combat axes, providing more flexibility in builds that include them. But on top of this, you get some absolutely excellent breakpoints for this thing. Maniac, Unyielding, and Flak may as well be wet tissue paper to this thing's heavy attacks, and it cuts through them just as readily as it will flesh of unarmored or infected horde chaff. As with most of our weapons that can hack it with hordes, there is a pretty familiar weakness to Carapace armor showing up again, but it's not completely out of luck. Thanks to the power of its heavy strike downs and its special backpick attack, it actually retains some acceptable damage to Carapace if you need to wail against it. While the stagger isn't as consistent as I'd like it to be, it provides a modest level of control over crushers that can be useful in teamfights combined with your allies' own damage sources. And against maulers, you can aim these same strikes at their flaky body for better damage and stagger as well. And while heavy swords can handle ragers easily one by one, it's not the most adept at handling rager brigades on its own. So even though it's generally good at ignoring mix-ins within the horde, keep an eye out for pockets of ragers, as these are better handled by your heavy moveset with careful positioning, or better yet, dodge sliding backwards and just using a gun. But that's all that there's really to say about its issues. Other than that, it's really not showing much of an Achilles heel, and there's a reason why it reached into the top 3 for Zealot weapons, considering how performant and versatile it can be in a build. I'd still want to run a weapon that can truly crumple Carapace, much like with the chainsword, so bringing a revolver or bolter is probably still a good idea. And either of these can also help pop ragers that need a bit of tender love and care from a safer distance. But the good news is it's not going to be leaning on your ranged weapon to pick up the slack as much as, say, the chainsword would. So in that way, it's a better general pick and a fine exclusive for Zealots to have as well. And at number 2, we have the Rashad Mark II Combat Axe. And it's a no surprise considering how beloved this weapon is when paired with Brutal Momentum, which is admittedly nearly a given for this weapon for its ability to heighten its cleave. But with this weapon and that blessing combined, you are getting a full package of war. It's got the mixed horde clear just like the heavy sword and chainsword, but the big ticket is how much it can crunch through heavy armor like Carapace. Managed through its penetration stat, you can just see how little the Rashad Axe cares that an enemy tried to wear tank armor to the party, and it's going to take the majority of each attack whether it likes it or not. And a notable difference between the Antax and Rashad Combat Axe is that the Rashad has a finesse weapon stat in place of a cleave stat, which is fitting seeing how its cleave is already plenty supplemented so successfully by Brutal Momentum. And this extra stat isn't just what makes it swing faster than the Antax, but also increases the internal multiplier that buffs your crit and weak point hits, making it even better when slamming those juicy overhead strike downs onto your enemies. And while Carapace is no contest for the Rashad, it does still have a familiar downside like the heavy sword, in that it does not seamlessly tackle Rager swarms particularly well, though of course 1 by 1 is still easy for this weapon to handle. Well, really, that's the only aspect of this weapon that needs to be compensated for, and it's quite easy to find plenty of ranged weapons that shut down ragers, leaving your options for ranged picks basically untouched anyway. And because of this, it makes an excellent control variable when testing out new ranged options, as it is simply just that good on its own. And for the number 1 spot, it might be a bit of a controversial pick to some, but an understood pick to others. But resting at the tippy top is the Indignitus Mark IV E Crusher. And it's had a history of being bad, and that's something I certainly know. And I know it's not going to be doing as much raw damage still as our heavy swords or the Rashad Combat Axe, but it is absolutely bonkers at controlling the field, while still possessing strong combos for tackling hordes and elites. And while you're obligated to take the Skull Crusher Blessing, the literal only damage boosting option this weapon has, that's all you need to get this weapon operating at its solid baseline. And since basically all its other blessings are impact related, a buff that just makes Skull Crusher that much more consistent, it's arguably the easiest weapon to roll blessings on, with a ton more room for error. But the impact on a fully kitted Crusher cannot be stopped. Even ragers that usually need to be kited and danced can just get mollywopped in the noggin to set them right. And while rager groups usually require you to change strategies and swap weapons, the Crusher's powered strikes can control all of them simultaneously, canceling their windmills of death and leaving them open for quick coup de grace. Not to mention, this weapon is such a giver for the squad, and its monumental control makes it damn near impossible to be overwhelmed, and the Skull Crusher debuffs for enemies makes your whole team more effective at whatever you're bonking. And even if the DPS doesn't stand perfectly toe-to-toe with some of the contemporaries here, that does not translate to a weakness against armor at all. Across the board, you are doing more than fine damage to every armor and enemy type. And with your enemy's newly formed intimate relationship with the floor, it's not hard to kill anything with repeated blows to the skull with little they can do to really stop you. And it may feel repetitive, but I cannot stress enough how much this control provides you. It really becomes a challenge more to the game to see if there is anything that it can send your team that can actually overwhelm you. And with this weapon, it's gonna have to really try once you get the handle with it. And just like the Rashad, you can put this shit on everything. But in this case, I really mean everything. It cracks carapace, handles hordes and everything in them, and it bullies specialists and elites, all with very few real downsides that need to be considered at a build level. And that's all for this video. And I know I probably left a favorite of yours out of the list, so let me know in the comments what you think should be added. There were some close ones that I really wanted to almost make an honorable mentions for, but to keep things more concise, I just couldn't include everything I wanted to share here. But otherwise, if you liked the video, drop a like, comment if I missed anything, and have a great day. See ya!